Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's webinar. I'm really pleased to be doing this webinar with Handshake, one of our supply partners we've got a really close relationship with. I'll hand over to Claire just shortly, but before I do, just a bit of housekeeping in terms of how our webinars work. Today we're going to be talking about nepotism, the word coined by Handshake. It's not a typo. They'll be talking about their research finding, which came out last week. Some really good, interesting stuff that's come out of that. Very important for our industry and for us to take note of. If you haven't been on one of our webinars before, and we like to make them as interactive as possible. Within the platform, you'll see you've got a questions box. So if you've got a question to ask through the session, just put your question into there. I'll be keeping an eye on those questions as we go through, and I'm going to come back on with about sort of 10 to 15 minutes at the end, and we'll put those questions to Claire, Paul and Louise. You can see Claire on your screen. We've also got Paul Blackmore from University of Exeter joining us, and Louise, Head of Student Recruitment at PwC, but they'll introduce themselves properly once Claire has done her initial presentation. We will aim to wrap up round about 1:30. If you do have to jump off early, you will get a link to the recording that will come to you via email probably later this afternoon, and then also it will be put onto our website so that actually you can go back and pick up any bits you missed on the webinar, or also please feel free to share it around with colleagues, etc. Right, that's enough from me. It's Claire who you've really come to hear from. So Claire, let me hand over to you. Take us away.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Claire Adams, as Stephen mentioned, and my role at Handshake is Head of University Success. Today, I'm going to be sharing some of the findings from Handshake's latest piece of research exploring the post-COVID jobs landscape and its implications for employers, students and university career services as well, with some excellent panelists that Stephen's already kind of mentioned. I know we have quite a few different attendees here today. Some of you might be quite familiar with the research already, may have already researched and read some of it yourself, and might be quite familiar with Handshake. Some of you may have worked with before, but for those of you, some of you may have been the first time you're hearing of this research, or indeed of Handshake as well. So I'm going to start at the beginning, if I may. So a little bit about me. I joined Handshake about 18 months ago and was the first employee hired in the UK. Prior to joining Handshake, I spent over a decade working in FE and HE, with my most recent role managing the career service at the University of Westminster, which is a place that still holds a very special place in my heart. And I know I'm not the only one, as the ISE's very own Stephen Isherwood is an alumnus of Westminster, so I'm not alone in that. I have a particular interest in diversity, equality and inclusion in higher education and early careers, and spent a few years on the ADCAS Social Mobility Working Party before joining Handshake and having to leave HE. Personally, from a personal perspective, I have been very privileged in many ways in my life. However, going to university, applying for graduate jobs and graduate schemes, professional networking, online networking sites, digital technology and environments are not something I would say is very commonplace in my family or frequently used. So a lot of my passion for this subject comes about from my own personal experiences, but also from the phenomenal students and colleagues that I have worked with over the years, both in education and student and graduate recruitment. Away from work, as I think it's important to always acknowledge that the people are people outside of work as well. I, like the whole country, very much looking forward to or doing anything outside of my own house at the moment. And along with half of the country, I recently got myself a puppy, so I'm feeling pretty sleep deprived at the moment, but that's enough about me. Let me briefly introduce Handshake. So this lovely picture is the beginning of Handshake. I'm probably going to get in a bit of trouble for sharing this picture, but I love it, and I'm opting for asking for forgiveness rather than permission. These three students, Garrett, Ben and Scott, are the three students who started Handshake nearly 7 years ago now, while studying at a small and very remote US university called Michigan Tech. They realised whilst at university the profile and location of the university that they were attending would impact the number and type of opportunities that were directly visible and available to them. You know, their skills, knowledge and drive, you know, was exactly the same and was no different from their peers at other universities. But like so many students like them, they were reliant on their personal connections, but also the connections and relationships that their university was able to develop and maintain. And they could see huge potential of a purpose-built, networked, digital solution to support levelling the playing field. So they set out on a bit of a mission to build one, and 7 years later there's no longer just the three of them. There's over 350 Handshake employees that support over 1,000 universities and education partners, over 500,000 employers, and over 7 million students and graduates, both in the UK and the US. We launched in the UK last summer. And so our company's mission is still very much the same. It's still to democratise access to opportunity, whether that be jobs, connections, or information. And we are always working to understand the challenges that are faced by students and the sector more broadly, looking to create innovative solutions to meet those challenges. And I think it would be fair to say that the last 12 months have been pretty challenging for all of us. The world, you know, our lives, our work, everything went digital. And for many of us, that pivot to digital had the potential to really accelerate much of the incredible work that's already been done by employers, universities and student groups in the last kind of 5 to 10 years to bring equality to access to opportunity. But there is, there's a good reason why when we talk about diversity, equality and inclusion, they're talked about together and they exist alongside each other and should be approached as a collective, not a separate context. For solutions to be really and truly effective, we need to design them with an inclusion mindset. So acknowledging our own privileges, our biases, whether they are conscious or unconscious, any blind spots we might have as individuals or as organizations, and continually challenging assumptions and asking questions. So whose voices aren't represented in the discussions that we're having, and proactively seeking to bring those voices in, even if it's challenging to do so or challenging to hear sometimes as well. And then kind of take that inclusion mindset to both the wider strategy, but also the really fine detail as well. So one of the assumptions that, as we sort of alluded to, that was made in the rapid pivot to digital was that this would open up access to opportunity. However, we need to acknowledge that the digital and offline worlds do not exist separate from one another. Existing patterns of inclusion and exclusion that impact students' learning, outcomes, connections, aspirations and overall experience still exist in a digital environment. And whilst technology and virtual recruitment practices ought to be a huge leveler in creating opportunities for students, our latest research indicates that during that rapid pivot to digital, many employers swapped one closed network for another. The research itself was completed by Savanta earlier this year to get perspectives from UK students, recent graduates and UK HR decision makers. Not going to spend a huge amount of time on this slide, but these are the kind of top line statistics, and you can also find this detail in the full report as well. So firstly, to sort of explore the findings, I'm going to share specifically from the employer experience or their experience over the last 12 months. So the majority of businesses 58% say it has been harder to connect with early career candidates since the start of the pandemic. And a third feel that so far it has been harder to reach more diverse pool of candidates, of graduates and students. And when we dig a little bit deeper into the research suggests there's a really good reason for that, actually. In the rapid pivot to digital, businesses understandably turned to what they knew. They turned to existing networks to connect with talent, whether that be professional networking sites or their own personal networks. And when we look even further at personal networks, 24% said that they had asked a friend for recommending potential candidates. 17% had asked family members, and 30% had asked colleagues. And we're only really sort of scratching the surface of some of these practices, but these practices risk entrenching existing privilege and excluding candidates from less connected backgrounds if they continue. Professional networking sites to anyone starting out in their career or switching careers can feel like a network for people who already have a network. And if you're the only child of whose parents and aunties, uncles, family, friends didn't go to university, aren't on LinkedIn, and the only person you know is your annoying older cousin who you see every couple of months, even less during a pandemic, that's the only person you know who's on LinkedIn, it's really hard to start to know where to start. And it feels like you're already starting on the back foot, especially when you log in and see all of the connections, endorsements, skills and work experience and access to opportunity that your peers already have. So opting out can feel like the more comfortable option, even if you're a mechanical engineering graduate who did a placement year and has done lots of extracurricular activities. It can be a daunting experience. And if you haven't guessed from that story, that annoying older cousin is me, and this is the real life experience of my cousin, who graduated into a world where digital professional networks play a huge role in our career success. But my cousin's experience is not uncommon, and it is the real world experience for many students. And we see this in our research findings too. So 33% of students and graduates think job applications and interviews are biased towards people with existing connections. And a further 26% have been frustrated by entry-level jobs demanding unreasonable amounts of experience, which is often realistically secured by students who are from more connected and affluent backgrounds. And these new risks we are terming nepotism. I promise it does get easier to say. In fact, you won't be able to say nepotism anymore once you've sort of repeatedly said this a few times. And this is really the danger of recruiting from the same closed networks virtually and eschewing that opportunity of broader access. These dangers of nepotism are also being compounded by more established problems associated with the digital divide, with 91% of students saying that they have experienced issues during digital recruitment practices. 34% saying they have difficulties with poor internet connection, 26% not having the right quality of equipment, 24% not having enough space or quiet, which I think many of us, I certainly can relate to, 15% just not knowing the etiquette of these new processes and practices. And with anything that we do at Handshake and anything I do, I never like to be more than 50% doom and gloom. So, and we all know that first step in kind of fixing a problem is identifying it. So we are on the right track, which is good news. From the research, we identified 3 areas we believe efforts should be focused on to start addressing some of these challenges. And first, perhaps not surprisingly from an educational technology provider, is technology. So ensuring students and recent graduates have access and feel comfortable with the technology required to access opportunities. There are lots of wonderful initiatives already looking closely at the digital divide, but there are additional steps that universities and employers can take. Access to laptops or up-to-date devices might be challenging for some students at certain times or certain times of the day, certain locations, different parental homes, those kinds of things. But among that 16 to 24 age group, 98% possess a mobile device. So are the opportunities that you are offering in this digital world and digital environment mobile friendly? And if not, why not? What can you do to make them mobile friendly? Beyond devices and hardware, all of us present today have learnt new digital skills in the last 12 months. So how can we collaborate as a sector to provide students with that digital capital that they need to operate successfully within these digital environments and get what they need out of it, especially for those who, offline environment means that they're perhaps less connected in the digital environment as well. At Handshake, we're doing this by continually researching and thinking about how we develop our mobile and desktop user experience to make it as accessible and intuitive to students as possible. The second theme is confidence. Now, confidence is a hugely complex idea in itself, and I mean, I would not feel confident if someone put me in a chess tournament next week. But if I had 6 months, perhaps a beginners club that I could attend, or an app I could practice on, or access to information on techniques and perhaps some people I could talk to about their first tournament, or a professional coach to kind of coach me through it, I would certainly feel a lot more confident. And 30% of students that we spoke to in our research said that they were not very confident or not confident at all in using professional networking sites. And I think it's really important to remember that that's not a deficit in that 30%. That's a really natural reaction to something that can be very intimidating and actually more challenging for some students through absolutely no fault of their own. So what are we doing to create more supportive and specialist environments where students can develop confidence in these areas? And for us at Handshake, that's about creating a dedicated early career network and community in collaboration with our fabulous universities and employers that we work with, whilst designing a user experience that supports early talent kind of every step of the way, with kind of subtle in-app nudges and a personalized, action orientated kind of experience. And finally, the final theme on here, which is again quite broad, I suppose, is proactivity. So the challenges highlighted in this research require a whole kind of ecosystem solution. We all need to be proactive in addressing some of these challenges. For employers, that can be as simple as just proactively messaging students. A third of the students that we spoke to said they wanted to hear more from employers who directly wanted to recruit students like them. And within Handshake, we already allow for this. Employers can directly message students and reach out to them, run campaigns, but we are committed to kind of continually exploring how we can support employers to do that and make sure the right messaging gets to the right candidates in the right format at the right time. More broadly, beyond kind of practical solutions, I think as a sector, we need to dig deeper into these challenges and design solutions that with that inclusion mindset in our minds, as well as being proactive and pragmatic. I I always remember an example an individual shared with me a couple of years ago about an initiative at a law firm where they were working, and the senior partners were bringing in kind of personal connections for work experience and shadowing. And so they instead of banning this practice and realizing that, because they realized it didn't align to their DE&I strategy, they acknowledged it, highlighted why it worked against the DEI strategy, which the firm were passionate about, and then introduced a sort of requirement for those partners to sponsor another opportunity for every student they brought in through a personal connection. Those senior partners were sponsoring an opportunity for a student who perhaps wasn't as well connected with the industry. And for me, that is such a good example of kind of identifying the problem, being pragmatic actually about the solutions, and being proactive with an immediate solution that is still working towards that longer term goal as well, but dealing with the issues at hand that represent themselves today. So that's a kind of overview of some of the key findings from our research and some of the kind of recommendations that we're making at Handshake in the ways that we think about some of these kinds of challenges. Further findings from the research can all be found in the full research paper, which you will receive as a follow-up after today's discussions. And we're really keen to keep the conversation going, so please do pop questions in the chat today, but also do connect with us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and tag us in your thoughts and comments and reflections as you sort of delve deeper into the findings and consider how this might impact your work and what you do going forward as well. To share their thoughts on the research and experience and their experiences of some of these kind of challenges, I'm very happy to welcome Paul Blackmore, Divisional Head for Student Employability and Academic Success at the University of Exeter, who are a Handshake partner, and Louise Farah, Director of Student Recruitment and Employer Brand at PwC, who are also a Handshake employer partner, I believe, both in the UK and the US. So thank you very much, both, for taking the time to join the discussion today and kind of get us started. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts. Louise, perhaps I could ask you to go first. Perhaps you could introduce yourself, and then Paul, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. So Louise Farah, I'm Director for PwC Employer Brand and Student Recruitment. I've actually been with the firm, it's my 20-year anniversary next month, so quite a long time. And I have to say, I started my career, so I didn't start the traditional graduate route. I joined 20 years ago as an admin assistant, and it was back in the day when it was a paper application form that came in the post, and my job was to unwrap that envelope and type in the basic details into a really old school computer. So I have to say we've definitely moved quite a long way forward in that 20-year career to where we are today. We are the largest private sector employer in the UK. We've got 23,000 employees across the UK, and we take roughly 1,500 graduates. We take around about 200 school leavers, and we've also got 10 degree partnerships as well.
Excellent.
That's me.
Paul, do you want to tell us a little bit about you and Exeter and the team at Exeter?
Thanks, Claire. Hello, everyone. So yes, my name is Paul Blackmore. I'm the Divisional Head for Student Employability and Academic Success, or otherwise known as SEAS, at Exeter. And the division basically has a brief for delivering a broad range of services to support student employability, professional and personal development. It's both delivered within the curriculum and via central services. So it's quite a huge breadth of provision. Also includes lots of place-based learning activities such as internships, placements, global experiences and field trips. So it really does encompass all of the non-discipline specific activity that adds to the employability and the personal development of our students. Part of that, and kind of relevant to this session, that I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute, is that the division also has a remit for supporting students from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. And we've had this brief for around 5 or 6 years now, so it's a fairly extensive portfolio, fairly robust, and does impact positively the career prospects and development of several hundred, if not thousands, of our students. So that's a big part of what we do and is integral to the university success for all agenda, and also our access and participation plan, which we have to report to the Office for Students.
Excellent. Thank you both for those excellent introductions. So Louise, I'm going to call on you to go first again, if that's okay. Can you share a little bit about why this research, I suppose, kind of matters to you, and perhaps, you know, PwC more broadly, and, you know, your kind of initial reflections and perhaps any experiences you might have had of some of the kind of themes we've been talking about in the research or in the findings?
Yeah, I mean, so diversity is obviously hugely important to PwC. We need to make sure we've got diverse people within our organisation to really serve our diverse client base. So it's absolutely at the heart of our strategy. I think I definitely recognise that there are huge disadvantages across the UK. And obviously, I think, you know, this sort of research kind of really brings it to life to organisations. I think you made a good point. You know, it's important to understand where you are as an organisation, to acknowledge it, and then understand what you need to then do to rectify it. So everything that we do in terms of strategy is hugely linked to accessibility. So everything from our attraction strategy, selection strategy, and then the programs, the work experience programs that we offer are all very much designed to be as accessible as possible. And I can talk more about them if anyone's got any questions around that.
Yeah, I might ask you to delve a little bit deeper into some of those for kind of some practical tips on how you make those kind of programs accessible. Yeah. Paul, before we do that, can I ask you the same question? Like, why does this research kind of matter to you and the team at Exeter, and what were your initial kind of reflections or any experiences of some of the kind of themes that are in the research as well?
Yeah, okay. So as I just mentioned, like many universities, the university has an access and participation plan. And as I said earlier in my introduction, the brief for students progressing and the university support for supporting our students' progression through the university and into future post-university life, i.e. a graduate level job, kind of falls mainly on the shoulders of my team. So that's particularly why this research is of interest. In terms of how some of the content resonates, I think it resonates mostly in terms of how employers have had to respond to the pandemic, in terms of a retraction of the number of jobs being offered, the challenges that they're facing in terms of accessing students and so on. I guess that there's a bit of a departure where we're fortunate, and that's in terms of the data that reflects how the students are struggling, because as much about design as well as luck, I guess, a combination of the two, because we've been engaging with our disadvantaged students for so many years now, and they're part and parcel of our overall delivery. You know, they are part of our Success for All agenda, which means, as it suggests, that everybody gets equal access. So we've been quite fortunate coming into the pandemic to benefit from the approach that we started 10 years ago, which was to engage all students, regardless of background and discipline, in a comprehensive career planning program that they all do. That's mandatory and delivered through the degree programs. And within that, we basically deliver obvious kind of guidance around how to start thinking about what jobs are out there, the different kind of occupations that they might apply for with their degrees, stereotype or not. We give them an in-depth immersion about how to use social media and how to present themselves on various technological platforms like LinkedIn and so on. So, you know, that's been a mainstay of what we do for some time. So our students have benefited from that going into the pandemic, I would suggest. Also, we have a whole range of bespoke activities and ring-fenced activities for those students in terms of gaining access to professional opportunities of work experience, experiential learning, mentoring schemes, and so on. So that's enabled us to protect our students to some extent. I can't claim all the credit in terms of how they're maybe not facing some of the challenges that were highlighted. The university was incredibly quick to respond to ensure that students had that technology to access their classes, because like many universities, all the teaching went online. And, you know, within days, a survey went out to ask all of our students, bar none, about whether they had the technology, whether they had the internet access to access online digitally delivered programs. So very quickly we were able to respond to those students and provide them with laptops and Wi-Fi dongles and so on and so forth. So, you know, in terms of our team's efforts, and the employers that engage with us, those students naturally were able to use that technology to access all of our services and all of our artificial intelligence interview platforms and that kind of thing. So, you know, they have benefited in that way. And so, yeah, what we'll be doing is effectively sense checking if there are any issues that we've missed out, and and benchmarking against the experiences of our students to see if there's anything we've missed and anything that we can enhance for those students. We've already started that process. We've just completed a graduate career support program where our teams have called over 6,000 or contacted over 6,000 graduates in the last 3 months to ask them where they are in terms of their career planning and job hunting and so on, and do they want any further support. Of those 6,000, 1,000, we've spoken to 1,000 graduates who are now being triaged through a whole variety of different interventions that we're delivering as part of our Careers Forever portfolio. So all in all, it's not to say that we haven't had challenges. We have, and all credit to my colleagues and the students, and the employers who are working with us. We've been able to weather the storm relatively well, I would suggest. Our net promoter score increased by 20%, taking the average feedback from very good to excellent from the students. So, you know, they're certainly impressed and grateful for the opportunities that we've given them. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are at the moment, and now I think it's more about now consolidating that activity, going over our provision, checking where we can enhance those services, continuing to liaise with the employers and sense check what their plans are going forwards. You know, is it hybrid kind of recruitment campaigns and an online selection, or is it totally online? And we'll obviously have to scenario plan for any of those consequences, basically. And we also, as you're aware, Claire, we also deliver a lot of in-house programs as well, professional pathways, where we engage employers and we give them insights to different occupations and sectors, and our employer colleagues, many SMEs as well as nationals and third sector, give them work experience opportunities. So we have to be proficient as well in terms of being able to roll out those and operate those recruitment practices online as well.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, there's what's clear there is there's so many different kind of work streams, and you're, as a team, you're sort of continually kind of evolving and reflecting and like you say, like finding where the gaps are and continually kind of moving forward. Louise, you were kind of you sort of touched upon some of the ways that you're kind of making some of your work experience or schemes more inclusive, and perhaps you could share a little bit sort of in the lines of kind of practical steps around what people could do, you know, locally within their employers to make some of those schemes more accessible, and I suppose in your mind, like what what other things would it be great to do, you know, as employers, universities in the sector, and technology providers as well? I'm not leaving us out of it. Like, what could we do more of together to kind of, you know, make things even more accessible, I suppose, for students?
Yeah, I think COVID in some respects has accelerated our investment in technologies, which obviously makes things more accessible generally. So things like attraction now, we've invested heavily in a virtual attraction platform, which essentially means we can communicate with anyone all over the country and globally. So students can engage with us from anywhere in the country, both school leaver and graduates, which for us has massively opened up that accessibility piece, because no longer are we restricted by manpower to, you know, rock up to a school or a university or whatever it is, an event across the UK, which obviously takes a huge amount of manpower to be able to do that. I mean, we are fortunate as a large organisation that we have the scale and resource to invest in such technologies, and I think, you know, that's absolutely key. But I can also see for some of the smaller and mid-tier organisations, that's more difficult. So things we've done obviously is attraction. We've made that hugely accessible. We've also built an employability hub. So essentially we've got bite-sized learning sessions available for students to upskill them in employability skills. Also things around, you know, cracking a selection process, all of those things to get them ready for the world of work. And then in terms of programs, it's really trying to identify the areas that will make the biggest difference, and we found that to be more around aspirational, so providing work experience to students from diverse backgrounds, also from a social mobility perspective as well, and kind of inspiring them to then think about a career, not just in professional services, but obviously in other areas as well, whether that be tech. So they're all things, and then what we'll do is we'll bring them on a work experience program, but then we'll kind of nurture and coach them through to, you know, a summer internship the year after, and then a full-time place with us following that. So other things we've done is more around kind of mentoring and coaching. So one thing that we've definitely found makes a difference, because they've not had that opportunity and access, is just really coaching them through the process to help them be the best they can be.
Yeah,
I think a big thing is definitely, unfortunately, investment in technology to make it more accessible is probably key. Certainly our selection process, you know, no longer do we, it's ultimately there's no, it's blind. So essentially we've harnessed the best in technologies to make it all about potential, inherent behaviours and traits that young people possess, and just as opposed to kind of, you know, what they might have had access to, so whether that be work experience, skills, opportunities. So we've massively moved away from that in the selection process as well. So it's all future focused and all based on potential, essentially.
Yeah, it's definitely a movement in that direction, isn't there, to allow for those kinds of differing experience to when they get to kind of apply. I think it's hugely positive. You sort of touched upon some of the things that the areas that you think have the most impact is around kind of raising aspirations. And I wondered, Paul, like from your experience of all of the amazing things that the team does at Exeter, like what do you think from a university careers perspective, like has the most impact in that area as well, around kind of raising those initial aspirations?
Okay, I'm conscious of the fact that I've got many of my team on this call, so I'm in danger of making a run for my own back by not mentioning everything. So apologies, team, if I don't mention your areas. Yeah, it's, I mean, what we try to do is make sure that our students, if they come from any of the WP or widening participation characteristics that identify them as such, for those on the call, possibly employers are not aware of these characteristics. There's probably around 12 or 13 formal or official government recognised characteristics that describe WP students or signpost institutions to ensure that they're getting fair access to all of the employability provision that we provide and so on. So across the piece, what we try and do is make sure that all of those students, regardless of those characteristics, have equal access to our provision across the piece. So each of the teams will have a brief to monitor that. So as part of that Success for All agenda that I mentioned before, there's roughly about 9 working parties looking at all the different parts of the student experience, ranging from the student journey entering, going all the way through and out. We're responsible for progression, which is ensuring students are building those skill sets and attributes and professional connections whilst they're at university, and also ensuring that they secure graduate level jobs upon graduation and beyond. So some of the things that are really effective are things like mentoring skills. We deliver a whole range of place-based learning activities that enable these students to get quality work experience. You know, more often than not, these students are more proactive anyway. Just by default, the fact that they're in university shows that, you know, they're keen, hardworking, and highly motivated. What we do to increase their social capital is give them access to quality work experience, so occupational training, so that they can hit the ground running when they go into their placements and internships and so on. They're very successful. And also, colleagues might be aware on the call that there's a lot of research that shows that those students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds benefit immensely from a global experience, an outbound mobility experience. It's literally life-changing for them. One of the challenges there is, of course, is that they don't always have the means to actually pay for those experiences if there's a charge, or they don't have the insight or recognize the benefit of taking long periods of time out of university on study abroad opportunities or long-term placements overseas. So what we have are special bespoke global leadership experiences which can be accessed from any of those those students with those WP characteristics, whether, you know, they could be carers, for instance, who can't take long periods of time away from their dependents. So, you know, a week's intensive global experience can change their lives, and we've got the evidence to show that you know, these have been really impactful. We've just started doing some analysis to show or illustrate the extent to which those students go into graduate level jobs, and we've only done 2 so far. And at a 15-month census point, 97% of those WP students on those programs have gone into graduate level jobs. So again, just to emphasize, it's graduate level jobs, it's not just any form of employment. So I think, you know, it shows how these proactive kind of programs deliberately targeting those groups can have a life-changing impact.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree with the outward mobility piece. Like, I was very lucky when I was at Westminster that we had a very similar scheme, and I was very lucky enough to go to Shanghai with a group of about, I think it was about 10 students who from a WP background, and it was I changed as a person when I came back. I think it was amazing. Like, and it was
yeah, it builds self-efficacy levels, increasing network. It does. It just yeah, it's literally life-changing for many students.
Amazing, right? Thank you. I think there's some really, like, you know, good kind of practical bits, the kind of where people can kind of focus the kind of priorities, I suppose. Last question, I suppose, from me, and then I'm going to hand back over to Stephen, who's probably got some questions from the audience as well. But one of the things that we've talked about quite a lot, I talked about in some of the research findings, but also as a business, we're really keen on is kind of partnership and collaboration across the sector. Like, if there was one thing that you think that, you know, universities, career services, student groups, maybe students directly, and you know, and technology providers as well could do together, like to support some of the challenges that we've sort of surfaced in the findings? Is there something that kind of jumps out at you? And Paul, I'm going to go to you first on that one, and then Louise.
Right. Okay. Well, there's no single one. There's several. So I guess out of those, I'll pick one that might not be as obvious to colleagues on this call. I'd suggest a lot of the success and the impact of these interventions starts before university, because if they haven't engaged in this activity when they come into university, or they're nearly coming towards the end of the university experience, you know, almost the horse has bolted to have that maximum impact on their future career prospects. So I think a lot of this starts at school, ideally before they leave compulsory education, if not during their college further education experience. And what government has introduced, if you're not aware of it, is something called Gatsby Benchmarks, which are basically a form of mandatory career guidance and exposure to the labour markets delivered within schools and colleges as well. And I guess you know, the more that universities and employers and stakeholders like yourselves and you know, the various social mobility intermediaries and so on can have a direct input into that provision within schools and colleges to extend the exposure that students have and pupils have to the world of work, it's going to be much more easier for them to build and exploit their personal networks and build that social capital and make the most of you know, the fantastic opportunity that higher education presents once they get in from day one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Louise,
totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, you know, not one organisation has the ability to impact some fundamental societal issues that start from a very early age. So I think more as a collective that we can recognise, acknowledge, and I think, you know, we're far more accountable and have to be, which is great, as and be responsible employers. So I think, you know, the more we can do kind of at primary in terms of raising aspiration, in terms of career advice, to get them better placed for university, the world of work, the better. And that takes everyone to make a difference ultimately, because it's vast. So yeah, that's probably the biggest barrier at the moment, I would say.
Yeah. And like magic, Stephen has appeared. No, I think
waiting for my cue, Claire.
Yeah, it's a whole, what we said, it's a whole ecosystem issue, isn't it? And something that we have to continually be reflecting on and be proactive about. So thank you both for sharing those. Stephen, what questions, do we got any questions for us?
We have, yes, we've got a few starting to come through now. So just a reminder, use the question box on the platform, and I will then pass those questions onto our panelists. Just want to kick us off, and it's coming to this piece around student perceptions, and we've seen this on some other bits and pieces as well as your research, Claire, from Handshake, and that's around just the numbers of students, or actually what students think about employers, and this danger that they almost don't believe employers, because we all know the hard work that employers do put into increasing diversity and inclusion, but students don't seem to believe it. And one of the things I wonder about, is that a function of the number of rejections that we're making? You know, talking to some employers is just eye-watering. And again, I'm like you, Louise, I remember pen and paper applications and opening the post, where of course we front-loaded a lot of testing now, so we can actually kind of assess more candidates, and in some ways that's a good thing. But I just wonder if that volume of rejections, you know, the student at the other end actually thinks, well, yeah, I'm just not getting through, and doesn't quite see that it's you know, the reasons for that rejections and what they are, and therefore might think about it is other things like nepotism or etc. Is that something that you worry about, Louise? Is it something that you think is an issue?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if I look at what we are, we're a huge rejections machine for the majority. So it's how do we ensure, and it's a big part of the strategy, that everybody comes away having become a better or got something out of the experience. So at every every part of the process we provide feedback. So literally right from the beginning right through to the end. Obviously, the further through the process you get, the more coaching you receive as well in terms of feedback. But yeah, it's obviously a difficult challenge given the volumes that we get applying to us. So it's something we're constantly thinking about.
Is that something usually effective, Paul? Oh, sorry, go on, Louise.
I was just saying, I mean, we massively manage pipelines as well, because what you don't want to do is disappoint too many. So I think, you know, as an employer, we've got a responsibility to make sure we're only putting the numbers through that we need.
And I guess, yeah, it's our approach to this is to make sure the expectations of students are realistic. And this is why we engage them at such an early stage in the first years. That's why it's a mandatory experience in terms of taking them through this process, giving them an awareness, an acute and detailed awareness of what the selection process involves, the reality that the odds are stacked against them. And instead we get them to think about, well, how are they going to narrow those odds? Quite simply, you know, have they researched the occupation? Have they looked at the methods of selection used by a given organisation? Have they practiced writing those applications, going through those interviews, you know, engaging in those assessment processes, using the artificial intelligence interview platforms that we've got, and so on, narrowing down the number of applications they make instead of, you know, a just spray and pray approach and think, right, okay, if I make 100 applications, you know, statistics should tell me that I will nail a job, but and make sure that that's not the approach they're taking, and instead that the narrowing down realistic kind of occupations that do fit their profile, that they have got the required work experience and so on, and that they've got a fallback position. You know, they've got a plan B, C, and D when plan A doesn't work. So that's kind of how we manage that. Going back to that issue, and we do sympathise incredibly with what Louise just said in terms of, you know, many institutions are a processing machine for mass rejections, and because that's inevitable if you're going to get oversubscribed and receive more applications than you've got jobs for. So I guess the other thing that, because we experience that as well, we have to go through that process when we run our own internal programs. And I think, so yes, it is important to provide feedback. We do recognise that there's only so much feedback you can provide if you've got tens of thousands of applications like PwC might. But also, if you can feed back the main areas in which the students are struggling and failing, i.e. they're not evidencing that they have competency A, B or C, or experience X, Y or Z, we can then build that into our programs. If we see it as being systemic, for instance, that all Exeter students or the majority of students who fail in the application process is due to a lack of commercial awareness, then obviously we can do something about that. We can build it into our programs, and we can advise our curriculum designers and build it into our own work. If it's a lack of group work, or they're not performing well in groups in assessment centres, then obviously, you know, that's something that we can be proactive about. So that's probably easier, I would imagine, to feed back to institutions, you know, where in general applicants are struggling, rather than to give detailed feedback to all individual students. It also means that we can actually benefit a critical mass of individuals and not just that one individual who's receiving the feedback.
Great, thanks, Paul. Question for you, Louise. I think this is a technical one, and it was somebody's asking about your career platform to upskill, and saying, is this for all potential candidates to use, or is it something that you just use for the people that you've made offers to or recent recruits?
No, so we've got the Employability Hub, which is open to everyone and anyone, and it's got a page for teachers, parents, students, school leaver and graduates, so literally open to all in terms of access. Similarly, our virtual platform for attracting students is as well. In terms of the selection process, we have worked with a number of suppliers essentially to move. So we don't have any interviews in our process. It's all future focused. It's all based around a day in the life of PwC, really to try and get them to understand what it is they're going to be doing and see if they're a good fit for us and vice versa. So they're getting that kind of real experience, but also because then it's more about future focused career scenarios. So that's kind of the general theme. So we don't have any of the business as well interviewing our students. So literally we've got trained professionals designed to be looking for the inherent behaviours that we're looking for young people to display to be a strong performer at PwC.
And just while I've got you, Louise, another question. This is coming from Laura, and she's asking, how are employers' priorities changing when it comes to attraction activities? And I'm assuming that actually that's this whole conversation we're having at the moment about what stays online, what goes back face to face, what stays hybrid. I mean, do you see as not going back to how we were before? It will be a very different way that somebody like PwC will operate post-pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. There's 2 points there. I think in terms of our strategy, we were probably 5 years ago, very much focused just on the graduate market, but recognizing a lot of the issues around diversity and inclusion, we moved our strategy to focus on school leavers. So much of our attraction strategy is actually focused around that kind of school leaver population. I think in terms of what I'm thinking we'll do going forward, I think the technology for us has given us greater accessibility, so I definitely don't see us moving backwards. I think it has been a catalyst for change and positive change, but recognizing you do need to make sure that it's accessible still. So, you know, if they haven't got access to laptops, you need alternatives. So I think it's probably going to be a hybrid of the two, but I would say probably more virtual than face-to-face, but still having that personal contact with students virtually. So, you know, we do in the virtual park every Friday, we do a Meet the Recruiter. That's no different to them going for a coffee chat. It's literally a one-on-one conversation where they can ask the same questions that they would. I mean, the beauty of that is that we can do it on far greater scale and they can come in at any point. We're not restricted to time, availability or any of those things. So for me, I think, yeah, we're going to stay probably investing in tech heavily, but with that kind of personal interaction still a big part of it.
I see you're nodding your head, Claire. That's probably music to your ears as a tech platform. But on the broader piece, again, is that something, would you echo what you're hearing from your other clients, other employers, what Louise is saying in terms of actually thinking about post-pandemic? What do these interactions look like?
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely what we're hearing, both, you know, just with employers, but also with career services as well, that, you know, there is going to be a much more of a kind of hybrid approach to how we deliver going forward. And I think that's one of the things that we're particularly kind of focused on from our kind of, and Paul probably knows quite a lot about this, and Louise as well, but like our kind of product development roadmap over the 12 months is very much focused on how can we bring those kinds of personal connections, like you said, those kind of coffee chats and things that sometimes happen, you know, at the end of a career fair, at the end of an event, those kinds of informal discussions, how can we bring them to life in a digital world as well? And I think that's where it gets really exciting, and we move, you know, beyond that initial pivot and actually really start to maximize some of the benefits that this can have, you know, for maximizing and truly democratizing kind of access to opportunity. So I'm actually quite excited about the next 12 months. I realize there's still quite a lot of challenges ahead, but I think there's a huge amount of potential and it can be quite exciting.
And just one last question. I'm conscious of time. We're pretty much up against the clock. But Paul, just one final question to you from Laura, and that's around career services better facilitating these virtual connections between employers and students. Is there anything that you sort of learned over the last 12 months as a service that where we can do better, I guess, particularly thinking as we start making plans for the autumn term?
Yeah, I guess if there's a big revelation for ourselves, it's that the fact that one of the surveys of ISE, I think that it was the recruitment survey in December, that said the third most in-demand skill set was remote working. And that just, for me, enabled us to change the whole kind of emphasis that we placed on our online services. So rather than finding ourselves on the back foot responding to negative headlines in the press that the universities are delivering a second-class service and it's online, it should be face-to-face, given that many employers now have basically saying that it's just inevitable that many of their employees are going to remain working from home or at a distance for the foreseeable future now because of efficiency gains, and everybody's managing to work collaboratively and effectively. So that's been the key thing for us, is not to kind of apologize, but to say, hey, look, by using Teams, using Mural, using all these different online collaborative tools now, you're actually acquiring the very same skill sets that are being prioritized by employers. So it's the messages to our students and saying that this is a bit like Clare, really. This is a positive step. We've been able to extend our provision and introduce all sorts of intercultural and international elements to all our provision as a result of having access to these collaborative tools. So yes, I'm quite positive in that regard, and saying that this whole change brought about by the pandemic has enabled us to introduce yet another tier of essential skill sets more readily for our students to acquire.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. I think we'll call it a wrap there. We've been an hour and I'm conscious that people have the next sort of Zoom or Teams meeting to go on to. That was a really great discussion there. So thanks, Louise and Paul, for joining us. And thanks very much to the support from yourself, Clare, and from Handshake for pulling all this together, and that really useful piece of research that you've done. As I said at the start, you will get a link to this recording. You'll also find the recording will go onto our website. And when you send you the email with the link, we'll also send you a link to the research that Handshake did. So you will get that. Thanks again for everybody's time. Really great session. Look forward to seeing you all again on Zoom before too long. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.